Have you ever stood at the edge of something new and felt completely frozen? It could be a blank document on your computer screen, waiting for the first word of a brilliant novel. It could be an empty canvas, waiting for a single brushstroke. Or maybe it's a big life decision, a conversation you know you need to have, but the words just won't come. You have this perfect idea in your head. It's shiny. It's flawless. It's a masterpiece. And the fear that you can't possibly create that perfect thing in reality is so strong that it stops you from doing anything at all. The fear of imperfection becomes a cage. Well, let me tell you about Leo. Leo lived in a small apartment with big windows that flooded his spare room with light. This room was supposed to be his art studio. It had the smell of potential, a faint, clean scent of turpentine and linseed oil. It had brushes, all neatly organized by size. It had tubes of paint in every color imaginable, arranged like a rainbow on his shelf. And in the center of the room, standing on an easel, was a large, perfectly white, perfectly blank canvas. It had been there for 3 months. To anyone else, it was just a blank canvas, a quiet object. But to Leo, it was loud. It shouted at him. Every morning he'd make coffee and stand in the doorway of the studio. He would look at the canvas, and the canvas would look back, judging him. It asked him, "Are you good enough? Are you ready to create the masterpiece you dream about?" And every morning, Leo's answer was silence. He would close the door and get on with his day, the weight of that empty canvas sitting on his shoulders. He imagined the first stroke. It had to be perfect, the exact right color, the exact right shape. But what if it was wrong? One wrong move, and the perfect painting he saw in his mind would be ruined before it even began. So he did nothing. He researched. He read books about famous artists. He watched documentaries about technique. He planned. He sketched in a notebook. But even the sketches felt too serious, too important. Each one was an audition for the main event, and none of them seemed good enough. His desire for perfection had become the perfect form of procrastination. The more he planned for a perfect start, the further away he got from starting at all. One afternoon, feeling especially frustrated, Leo couldn't stand being in his apartment anymore. He left without a destination, just walking through the streets of his neighborhood. A warm, sweet smell pulled him down a small side street he'd never noticed before. It was the smell of baking bread and melting sugar. He found its source, a tiny bakery called the Rising Loaf. The windows were a little foggy from the warmth inside. He pushed the door open, and a little bell chimed. The warmth and the smell enveloped him like a hug. Behind the counter was an older woman with kind eyes and flour dusting her apron and her hair. Her name was Clara. "Just a coffee, please," Leo said. He sat at a small table by the window, watching Clara move around her small kitchen. She worked with a comfortable, easy rhythm. She kneaded dough, shaped rolls, and slid trays into a massive oven with a confident grace. Nothing about her movements seemed anxious or hesitant. She was just doing. He started visiting the Rising Loaf every day. It became his escape from the silent judgment of the blank canvas. He would sit with his coffee and watch Clara work. Sometimes they would talk. Small talk, at first. About the weather, about the neighborhood. One day, Clara noticed him sketching in his notebook. "You're an artist," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm trying to be," Leo corrected her, his voice quiet. "What do you paint?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Nothing, recently," Leo admitted. He felt a familiar wave of shame. He closed his notebook. Clara didn't push. She just nodded and gave him a small, knowing smile before turning her attention to a tray of cookies that needed to come out of the oven. A few days later, Leo came in, looking defeated. The canvas was still white. The masterpiece was still locked in his mind. He hadn't even opened the studio door that morning. He sat down heavily in his usual chair. Clara brought him his coffee. "Still a beautiful day for painting," she said gently. Leo sighed. "I can't. Why not?" "Because I'm afraid," he said, the confession tumbling out before he could stop it. "I have this image in my head. It's good. It's the best thing I could ever paint. But when I pick up the brush, all I can think is that I'm going to mess it up. I'll make a mistake, and it won't be perfect." Clara listened patiently. She then looked over at her cooling rack, where a slightly misshapen pancake sat by itself. "You see that pancake over there?" she asked. Leo nodded. "That was the first one I made this morning. The pan wasn't hot enough. It's ugly. The batter spread all wrong." She picked it up and took a bite. "Still tastes good, though," she said with a smile. She looked back at Leo. "The first pancake is always a mess. Always. But you have to make it. You have to make the messy one, to get the temperature right, to get the feel of it. If I waited for the pan to be the perfect temperature before I even mixed the batter, I'd never make a single pancake." Leo stared at her. It was so simple. "What about the paintings you see in a museum?" he asked. "They look perfect. You think Van Gogh's first try at Starry Night was perfect? You think every loaf of bread I bake comes out looking beautiful?" "No," she laughed. "I have a bin in the back, full of burnt crusts and cookies that fell apart. You don't see the drafts. You only see what the artist decided was good enough to show. But you can't get to good enough without getting through a lot of not quite right. Perfection isn't the goal. The goal is just to begin, to make something. Anything." She pointed a floury finger at him. "Your problem is you're trying to bake a wedding cake when you haven't even tried making the first messy pancake. Go home. Don't try to paint your masterpiece. Just make a mark. Any mark. Paint the ugliest, messiest thing you can imagine. Give yourself permission for it to be terrible. Give yourself permission for it to be terrible." The words echoed in his head all the way home. He walked back to his apartment, but this time he didn't feel the usual dread. He felt a spark of something else. Not quite courage, but maybe curiosity. He stood in front of the studio door. He took a deep breath. He opened it. The white canvas was still there. It was still bright and intimidating. But Clara's words were louder. "The first pancake is always a mess." He walked over to his tubes of paint. He didn't think about which color was right. He just grabbed one. A bright, bold yellow. He squeezed a large amount onto his palette. He picked up a big brush, not a small, precise one. He looked at the canvas, then at the paint. He wasn't thinking about the masterpiece anymore. He was just thinking about making a mark. And then he did it. He plunged the brush into the yellow paint and swiped it across the canvas. A big, bold, beautiful, imperfect yellow stripe. It wasn't planned. It wasn't delicate. It was just there. And it was wonderful. The silence was broken. The canvas was no longer a blank void. It was the beginning of something. Leo laughed. A real, deep laugh of relief. Then he grabbed another color. Blue. He added a stroke next to the yellow, then red, then green. He wasn't painting an image. He was just painting. He was dancing with the colors. He lost track of time. For the first time in months, he wasn't fighting with his own expectations. He was playing. He worked for hours, until the light began to fade. Finally, he stepped back. The canvas was full of color, of energy, of chaos. It wasn't the calm, perfect landscape he had imagined in his head for so long. It was wild, and alive and messy. It was full of mistakes, and he loved it. It wasn't a masterpiece, but it was finished. It was real. Leo realized that Clara was right. The goal was never to create a perfect painting. The goal was to have the courage to paint. The treasure wasn't the final product, but the liberation found in the process. From that day on, Leo painted every day. Some paintings were good. Some were, in his opinion, terrible. But they were all his. He filled his studio with canvases, each one a testament not to perfection, but to the simple, profound joy of starting. That blank canvas we all face, it isn't waiting for a masterpiece. It's just waiting for you to be brave enough to make the first mark. It's waiting for you to make your first messy pancake. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to begin.